Punished by her tribe, the Apache woman ended up loving the man she was supposed to hate. Ayesha was known among her people as a proud and strong Apache woman. Her long dark hair, often braided with beads, flowed like a river in the sunlight, and her eyes carried the fire of someone who would never bow to fear. From a young age, she had learned the ways of her tribe, how to track animals silently through the forest, how to move without a sound, and how to listen to the wind to understand the coming weather. She was skilled, independent, and confident, and everyone knew she had the spirit of a warrior. Yet her spirit, so full of life and curiosity, sometimes led her into trouble. The trouble began one quiet morning, when Ayesha decided to explore beyond the boundaries of the land her tribe had always considered sacred. She had heard stories of another village across the river, a place where outsiders lived, and though her elders had warned her not to go near it, her curiosity was too strong. She wanted to see the world beyond her people, to understand it, even just a little. With the rising sun casting golden light over the land, she quietly slipped away, moving through the forest as lightly as a deer. Her heart beat with excitement, but she did not know that every step she took was leading her closer to punishment. By the time she reached the river, she saw signs of life she had never seen before. Smoke curled from chimneys, and she could hear the faint sounds of men and women working together in ways that were different from her tribe. She watched silently, hidden among the trees, feeling a mix of fear and fascination. For hours she observed the humans of that village, noting their actions, their voices, the way they moved. There was something intriguing about them, but also something alien. She wanted to stay longer to learn more, yet the thought of being caught by her own people filled her with anxiety. When she finally returned to her village at dusk, her absence had already been noticed. The elders were waiting, their faces stern, their eyes sharp. Ayesha had always respected her tribe, but she could see that this time she had gone too far. She tried to explain herself, telling them that she only wanted to learn, only wanted to see the world outside, but her words were met with silence. The elders exchanged glances and their faces hardened. The council of the tribe had gathered and the air was tense. Her father, a respected warrior, stepped forward. His voice, usually calm, trembled with disappointment. "Ayesha," he said, "you have disobeyed the rules of our people. You have risked the safety of the tribe. Curiosity is not a crime, but this defiance cannot go unpunished." Ayesha felt a pang of fear but also a spark of defiance. She wanted to argue, to explain that she meant no harm, but she knew her words would not change the council's decision. She had always known that the tribe valued rules above all, and this was a rule she had broken. The elders debated her fate for what felt like hours. Ayesha stood quietly, listening, though her heart was racing. They spoke of trust, of respect, and of the dangers of interacting with outsiders. Finally, one elder spoke with a voice that carried authority and finality. "Ayesha has learned nothing from her actions. She cannot remain among us without bringing dishonor and risk. She must be sent away to live among those she was forbidden to approach until she understands the weight of her choices." The word struck Ayesha like a blow. Sent away, to live among outsiders. Her mind raced. She felt fear, anger, and disbelief all at once. Her father looked at her with a sorrowful expression, and even his eyes could not hide the sadness he felt at what had to be done. Ayesha wanted to protest, to run, to do anything to stay, but she knew there was no escape. The council's decision was final. The next morning, Ayesha was escorted by 2 guards through the forest paths she had once walked freely. The sun was just rising, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. She looked back at the village one last time, her heart aching. The place that had been her home, the people who had shaped her life, all seemed distant now, as if she had been cut from the roots that held her. She felt a deep sense of loss, a grief that was more than sadness. It was a burning fire in her chest, fueled by fear and anger. As they traveled, Ayesha noticed the world outside her village in a new light. Every tree, every hill, every stream seemed both familiar and foreign. She realized that the outside world was beautiful but also uncertain, dangerous, and unpredictable. Her mind wandered to the village she had seen across the river. She did not know what awaited her there, but she sensed that life was about to change in ways she could not imagine. When they finally arrived at the outskirts of the settler village, Ayesha saw a man waiting. He was tall, with strong shoulders and steady eyes that seemed to assess everything at once. His presence was commanding, yet there was something calm in his demeanor. Ayesha's heart sank. This was the man she was supposed to distrust, the man she was told to hate. She looked at him and felt a rush of conflicting emotions: fear, anger, resentment, and something she could not yet name. The man introduced himself as Ethan. He did not raise his voice, did not threaten her, but his eyes were sharp, watching her as if trying to understand the storm inside her. "I will not harm you," he said quietly, "but you must stay with me until your people decide otherwise." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. Ayesha wanted to argue, to resist, but she realized it was useless. Her fate was not in her hands, at least not for now. The first days were the hardest. Ayesha refused to speak, refused to eat the food he offered, and resisted every attempt he made to help her. She kept her distance, her arms crossed, her eyes cold. She could feel the walls of anger and distrust growing higher around her heart, protecting her from a world she was not ready to accept. Ethan, however, did not push her. He gave her space, allowed her silence, and performed his duties with quiet patience. At night, Ayesha lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the settler village, the creaking of wooden beams, the distant barking of dogs, the soft murmur of voices outside. She missed the familiar sounds of her tribe, the laughter of children, the rhythmic chants during ceremonies. Her heart ached with longing, but she would not admit it, not even to herself. She clung to her pride, to the fire that had always defined her. As days turned into weeks, Ayesha began to notice small things about Ethan. He was careful not to upset her, he did not mock her, and he seemed genuinely interested in her well-being. He would leave her food near her space, without insisting she eat it, and he would repair things around the house, quietly working while she watched. At first she scowled at his presence, but slowly she could not help but notice that he was different from what she had been taught to expect. One afternoon, a storm approached. The sky darkened and the wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and earth. Ethan prepared the small cabin for the coming weather, and Ayesha watched him from a distance. She saw the way his hands worked with care, the way his face remained calm despite the growing storm. She felt a strange sense of admiration, though she immediately pushed it away, calling herself foolish. How could she respect or feel anything for a man she was supposed to hate? Yet, as the storm raged outside, something shifted inside her. She realized that despite her anger, fear, and resentment, she was still alive, still learning and still growing. She could not deny that her life had changed forever the moment she was sent away from her tribe. She could not predict what the future would bring, but she sensed that this journey, though painful, was teaching her lessons she had never imagined. Ayesha lay down that night, listening to the rain tapping against the roof. She thought of her tribe, of the punishment, and of Ethan. Her heart was a storm of conflicting emotions, yet amid the chaos, a tiny spark of curiosity began to flicker. Perhaps this punishment, though harsh, was also an opportunity to learn not just about the world but about herself. And as the night deepened, Ayesha closed her eyes, her mind racing, her heart aching but her spirit unbroken. She did not yet know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that she would face it with the same courage and determination that had always defined her. She had been punished, yes, but she had also been given a chance to see life in a new way, and even in her anger and fear, she could not help but wonder what lay beyond the horizon. Ayesha had been living in Ethan's small cabin for several weeks now, yet every day felt like a test of her patience and willpower. The first days had been unbearable. She refused to speak, refused to eat properly, and kept herself isolated in a corner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if her body could shield her heart from the world. Ethan, despite being the man she was supposed to hate, never forced her to do anything. He understood that anger and fear could not be rushed, and he treated her with quiet patience, giving her space while still making sure she had what she needed to survive. At first, Ayesha watched him with suspicion. Every action he took seemed calculated, every word spoken carefully. She was convinced he was trying to trick her, to manipulate her in some way. But over time, she began to notice that Ethan's actions were consistent, gentle, and honest. He would leave food near her without demanding that she eat it. He would repair broken parts of the cabin silently while she watched, never making her feel uncomfortable or watched. Even the way he walked, careful not to make sudden noises, suggested a respect for her presence, even if she didn't trust him. Ayesha's days began to follow a routine, though she did not think of it as comfort. She would wake with the sunrise, stepping outside to watch the world, the sky turning pink and gold over the trees. She would sometimes follow Ethan as he went about his daily tasks, chopping wood, fetching water, tending to the small garden, but always at a distance, never speaking. Ethan would glance back at her now and then, giving a soft nod or smile, never forcing her to join him, never rushing her. Though she would never admit it, she began to feel a strange mix of curiosity and grudging respect for him. One morning, Ayesha decided to leave the cabin for a short walk into the woods. Ethan did not stop her, only reminding her gently to be careful. She wandered through the trees, listening to the birds and the wind in the leaves, feeling both free and restless. She realized that though she was angry at being sent away from her tribe, she was also learning to see the world differently. The forest outside her village seemed the same in many ways, yet subtly different. The smells, the sounds, the way the sunlight fell through the branches, it all made her more aware, more attentive, more alive. But even with these small discoveries, her anger never fully left her. She still thought about her tribe, about the punishment, and about the man she had been sent to live with. How could she ever trust him? How could she accept that she might need him, or that he might not be as terrible as she had been told? Every time she saw Ethan quietly working or noticed the careful way he treated her things, she felt a flicker of confusion. Her heart, which she thought had been hardened by punishment and anger, began to notice feelings it was not ready to understand. One day, while fetching water from a nearby stream, Ayesha slipped on a wet rock and twisted her ankle. Pain shot through her leg and she stumbled, trying to catch herself. Ethan, who had been chopping wood nearby, ran to her immediately. Without a word, he helped her to a nearby rock and examined her ankle. His hands were steady and careful, and his voice, calm and soft, reassured her. "It's not broken," he said, "but you need to rest. You should not walk too far today." Ayesha wanted to refuse, to insist she could manage on her own, but she realized that she could not deny the truth. Her ankle throbbed painfully with every step. Ethan helped her back to the cabin, carrying her small bundle of things and gently supporting her as she walked. She felt a strange warmth at the care he showed, though she refused to call it gratitude. She sat quietly as he prepared a place for her to rest, feeling embarrassed by her own weakness. That night, as the fire crackled in the cabin, Ayesha found herself watching Ethan without meaning to. He moved with ease and confidence, performing his tasks with calm efficiency. She could see the patience in his eyes, the quiet strength in his presence. It annoyed her to feel admiration for him, yet she could not deny it. She clenched her fists under her blanket, telling herself that respect did not mean trust, that admiration did not mean friendship. But even as she tried to push her feelings away, A small part of her began to wonder what it would be like if life could be different, if people from different worlds could coexist peacefully. Over the following days, their interactions slowly changed. Ayesha began to speak in small sentences, answering Ethan when he asked simple questions, though she always kept her tone guarded. She would sit nearby while he worked, sometimes asking him about the forest, the plants, or the small animals they occasionally saw. Ethan answered patiently, sharing knowledge without ever making her feel inferior or foolish. He explained how to find edible berries safely, how to build a simple trap for small game, and how to read the patterns of clouds to predict weather. Ayesha listened carefully, learning, absorbing, and even beginning to appreciate the life she had been forced into. Despite these small steps, Ayesha's pride remained strong. She refused to let Ethan see her fear, her loneliness, or the moments when she doubted herself. At night, she would sit outside the cabin, staring at the stars, thinking of her tribe and imagining herself back home. She thought of her father, her friends, and the familiar life she had lost. Yet she also thought of Ethan, sometimes in frustration, sometimes in curiosity, and sometimes in a way that made her cheeks warm without reason. She hated that these thoughts came uninvited, yet they could not be pushed away. One afternoon, a messenger from her tribe arrived. Ayesha's heart leapt with hope and anxiety. Perhaps her people had reconsidered. Perhaps she could return. But when the elder spoke, he told her that her punishment was not yet complete, that she would remain with Ethan for a while longer, to learn lessons she had not yet understood. Ayesha's anger flared, but Ethan's calm presence reminded her that resistance alone could not change her situation. She buried her frustration deep inside, trying to focus on the small comforts she could find in her current life. The days turned into weeks, and slowly the walls around Ayesha's heart began to crack. She noticed small things about Ethan, how he tended to the fire to keep her warm, how he would quietly mend her clothes, how he never complained or scolded. She saw the kindness in his actions, the steadiness in his presence, and the reliability that made her life feel a little safer. Her anger had not disappeared, but it began to coexist with something else, a cautious sense of trust, a recognition that perhaps he was not her enemy after all. One evening, as they both watched the sunset from the edge of the forest, Ayesha felt a strange sense of calm. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, and the wind carried the sweet scent of the nearby flowers. She looked at Ethan, who was quietly observing the same view, and for the first time she felt a fleeting sense of companionship. It was not love, not yet, but something softer, something tentative. She felt the stirrings of a new understanding, that people could be more than the labels her tribe had placed on them, that trust could grow even in unexpected places. By the end of part 2, Ayesha's life had begun to shift in subtle ways. She was no longer the defiant, angry girl who had first arrived in Ethan's cabin. She was learning patience, observation, and quiet resilience. She was beginning to see that the world outside her tribe was complex, and that not all outsiders were enemies. And though she would never admit it aloud, she could not deny the impact Ethan had on her life. The quiet, steady presence of a man who treated her with respect, care, and an understanding that went beyond words. Ayesha had been living with Ethan for several months now, and though her anger had softened slightly, her pride remained as strong as ever. She had learned to trust him in small ways, accepting food he offered, listening when he spoke, and even joining him in simple tasks around the cabin. Yet, she refused to let herself become comfortable or dependent. She was determined to remain independent, no matter how much her heart whispered otherwise. One morning, the sky was heavy with dark clouds, and a sharp wind blew through the trees. Ethan had gone out to check the livestock, and Ayesha was collecting water from the stream. She noticed that the water level was higher than usual, and the current seemed stronger. She paused, sensing danger, and decided to hurry back. As she turned to leave, a sudden crack of thunder rolled through the sky and the wind grew fiercer. She stumbled on the wet rocks, nearly falling into the rushing water. Panic surged through her, and for the first time she screamed, a sound that echoed across the forest. Ethan appeared almost instantly, as if he had sensed her trouble. He grabbed her arm and steadied her, his eyes calm but serious. "Hold on," he said. "The current is strong, but we'll get through this together." His voice carried reassurance, a promise that he would not let harm come to her. Ayesha's heart pounded in her chest, not from fear alone, but from the realization that he truly cared. She wanted to pull away, to insist she could manage alone, but the power of the river and her own weakness made resistance impossible. She allowed him to guide her back to the riverbank, his hands firm yet gentle. Once they were safe, Ayesha collapsed onto the ground, soaked and trembling. Ethan knelt beside her, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "You must be careful," he said softly. "The forest can be dangerous when the storms come." Ayesha, still catching her breath, wanted to respond with anger or defiance, but no words came. She simply looked at him, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions. Fear, gratitude, confusion, and a strange warmth filled her chest. She hated that she needed him, yet she could not deny the truth. The storm worsened as they returned to the cabin, rain lashing against the roof and wind rattling the walls. Inside, Ethan lit the fire and prepared dry blankets. Ayesha wrapped herself in them, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. She realized how vulnerable she was, how reliant she had become on a man she was supposed to distrust. She wanted to hate him, to push him away, but she could not deny the safety and comfort he provided. And though she refused to speak of it, she began to feel something new: respect, perhaps even admiration, for the quiet strength and patience he showed. The next day, the storm left the forest battered and muddy. Trees had fallen, and paths they used to travel were blocked. Ethan suggested they go out together to repair the damage, and though Ayesha hesitated, she agreed. As they worked side by side, hauling fallen branches and clearing debris, a sense of partnership began to grow. She saw how skilled he was, how his strength and careful planning made tasks easier. She realized that surviving in this world required cooperation, not just stubborn independence. As the days passed, Ayesha began to notice more about Ethan, the little details that revealed his character. He was patient, not just with her but with the land, the animals, and the work that had to be done. He never rushed, never complained, and always considered the best way to solve problems without causing harm. Ayesha found herself admiring his intelligence, his foresight, and the quiet confidence that allowed him to face challenges calmly. She hated that she admired him, hated that she was beginning to feel something she could not name, yet she could not deny it. One afternoon, they were checking the small fence around the livestock when they heard rustling in the bushes. At first, they thought it might be a deer or a wild animal, but then they saw two men approaching, their intentions unclear. Ethan immediately positioned himself between Ayesha and the strangers, his eyes alert. Ayesha's heart raced and fear surged through her, but she realized with a strange sense of relief that she trusted Ethan to protect her. He did not hesitate, did not panic. Instead, he calmly assessed the situation, speaking firmly to the men and ensuring that no harm came to either of them. After the strangers left, Ayesha's hands trembled, and she realized how close danger had been. She wanted to hide her fear to maintain her pride, but Ethan placed a steady hand on her shoulder, not intrusive, just supportive. "You're safe," he said softly. "We handled it together." The words struck her in a way she did not expect. For the first time, she truly understood that survival and even life itself could not be achieved alone. She had to rely on others, even if it meant letting down her walls. Over the next weeks, their bond deepened in subtle ways. Ayesha began to speak more freely, asking questions, sharing thoughts, and even laughing at small jokes Ethan made. She noticed how he observed her without judgment, how he adapted to her moods, and how he valued her opinions. She began to see him not as an outsider or captor, but as a person with strengths and weaknesses, fears and hopes, much like herself. And though she would never admit it, she began to enjoy his company, feeling a sense of comfort she had never expected. One evening, while repairing a damaged part of the cabin roof together, Ethan slipped slightly on the wet wood. Ayesha's reflexes took over before she could think. She grabbed his arm, steadying him. Their eyes met, and in that instant she felt a jolt of emotion she could not explain. Relief, concern, and something softer intertwined in her chest. She pulled back quickly, feeling embarrassed by the intensity of her feelings. Ethan, sensing her discomfort, simply nodded and smiled, his eyes warm but not probing. He did not press, allowing her the dignity of her space, but the moment lingered in her mind. Ayesha began to reflect on her life, realizing that her initial anger and resentment had been only a part of her experience. She was learning lessons she had not expected, lessons about trust, patience, and the complexity of human nature. She began to understand that Ethan's calmness and care were not weaknesses, but strengths. And slowly, she began to recognize that her own pride and stubbornness had been barriers to growth, keeping her from seeing the world clearly. Their shared experiences, the storm, the danger, and the everyday work of survival, began to change Ayesha in ways she could not ignore. She saw that Ethan was reliable, capable, and kind, and she could not help but respect him. More than that, she began to feel a sense of connection, a bond formed not through words, but through actions and shared challenges. And though she resisted the idea of liking him, she could not stop the warmth that began to grow in her heart. One morning, Ayesha found herself watching Ethan as he worked in the garden. The sun was warm, birds sang in the trees, and the smell of fresh earth filled the air. She noticed the careful way he handled the plants, the gentle way he moved, and the way he seemed at peace with the world around him. She felt a pang of admiration, followed by confusion. How could she feel respect, even affection, for a man she had been taught to hate? She pushed the thoughts away, yet they returned again and again, persistent and undeniable. By the end of part 3, Ayesha's life had changed profoundly. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and she had survived with Ethan's help. She had begun to see him not as an enemy, but as a companion, someone she could rely on, and slowly, someone she could care for. Her anger had not disappeared, but it had transformed, giving way to a complex mix of respect, trust, and curiosity. And though she did not yet understand the full depth of her feelings, she sensed that her heart was opening in ways she had never imagined, preparing her for the challenges and emotions yet to come. The days passed, and Ayesha found herself thinking of Ethan more often than she wanted to admit. At first, she convinced herself that these thoughts were harmless curiosity, nothing more than noticing the way he moved, or the calmness in his voice, or the way his eyes seemed to understand without asking questions. But slowly, she realized that her heart was responding in ways she could not control. She felt warmth when he smiled, relief when he protected her, and a strange ache when he was not near. It terrified her. How could she feel anything but resentment for a man she was supposed to hate? Her mind struggled with confusion. Loyalty to her tribe, to her family, and to the rules she had always known, clashed with the emotions rising in her chest. She had been taught that outsiders were not to be trusted, that they were enemies in many ways, and yet Ethan had shown her nothing but patience, kindness, and respect. Every time she tried to remind herself of her anger and resentment, she found it harder to focus. His presence had become a quiet comfort, even as it frustrated her pride. One afternoon, a small accident in the cabin forced them to work closely together. A pile of firewood had fallen, and Ethan had tried to lift it alone, straining his back slightly. Ayesha rushed to help him, and together they lifted the wood back onto the stack. Their hands brushed and both froze for a moment. Ayesha's heart raced, her face warming, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed by her reaction. Ethan, sensing her discomfort, offered only a small, reassuring smile, and the moment passed without words. But Ayesha could not stop thinking about it. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the cabin was lit by the soft glow of the fire, Ayesha sat quietly, her thoughts spinning. She wondered if she was becoming weak, letting feelings grow for a man she was supposed to hate. But another part of her, a part she rarely acknowledged, felt a longing she could not name. She remembered the times Ethan had protected her, the patience he had shown, the quiet strength that had comforted her during storms and fear. Slowly, she realized that her admiration was no longer just admiration. It was something deeper, something that scared her because it meant vulnerability. The next morning, she decided to distance herself. She worked silently, keeping her distance, refusing to meet his eyes too long and focusing on tasks around the cabin. Yet, even as she tried to push him from her thoughts, she noticed how often he looked at her, with gentle patience, as if he understood her inner struggle. It frustrated her, but also stirred something in her heart she could not ignore. She was learning that love, respect, and trust could exist in ways that were not loud or forceful. They could grow quietly, almost imperceptibly, through actions and care. Days turned into weeks, and Ayesha felt a change in herself she could not deny. She began to notice small details, the way Ethan would pause to observe the sky before predicting the weather, the way he treated the animals with care, the way he never judged her when she made mistakes. She realized that he valued her thoughts, her skills, and her opinions. She had expected disdain or dismissal, but instead, he offered partnership and respect. Slowly, her pride gave way to something more tender. One afternoon, they were repairing the roof together, and a sudden gust of wind nearly threw Ayesha off balance. Ethan caught her arm instinctively, pulling her close to steady her. For a moment, they stood frozen, faces close, hearts pounding. Ayesha could feel the heat of his presence, the steady beat of his heart, and she realized with a jolt that she trusted him completely. Her mind raced. Was this what it meant to care for someone? Could she feel love for a man she had been taught to hate? The questions terrified her, yet the truth was undeniable. Over the following days, Ayesha found herself reflecting on her tribe's teachings and her own beliefs. She had always valued strength, courage, and independence, but she realized that these qualities did not require her to shut herself off from connection. Love, trust, and companionship were not weaknesses. They were parts of life that gave it meaning. And Ethan, with his quiet strength, patience, and respect, embodied these qualities in ways she had never imagined. She began to understand that her feelings were not a betrayal of her tribe, but a step toward understanding herself and the world around her. Despite her growing emotions, Ayesha's pride remained a constant challenge. She did not know how to express what she felt, and she feared that speaking would make her vulnerable in ways she was not ready for. She practiced patience, observing Ethan from a distance, noting the small acts of kindness that made him remarkable. She noticed how he would leave food prepared for her without forcing her to eat, how he would repair broken tools silently, and how he would guide her through difficult tasks without condescension. Each act built her admiration and slowly, almost imperceptibly, her affection. One evening, while sitting by the fire, Ethan shared a story from his past, a memory of his family, his childhood, and the lessons he had learned growing up in the outside world. Ayesha listened quietly, fascinated by his words. She realized that his life had also been shaped by challenges and hardships, and that he, too, had faced fear, uncertainty, and responsibility. The story reminded her that people were not simple, and that understanding and empathy could bridge even the widest gaps between different worlds. She began to see Ethan not as an outsider, but as a person with depth, complexity, and a heart as strong as her own. Ayesha's feelings became harder to ignore. She caught herself thinking about him when he was away, wondering how he was spending his time, and even hoping for small interactions that had once seemed insignificant. The warmth in her chest was new, unfamiliar, and both frightening and comforting. She began to understand that love was not about weakness, but about courage. The courage to open her heart, to accept connection, and to trust someone completely. Yet the struggle within her continued. She could not forget her tribe, her family, or the rules she had been taught. Loyalty and tradition tugged at her heart, reminding her of duty and responsibility. But each time she looked at Ethan, she realized that connection, respect, and love did not negate duty. They added layers of understanding, compassion, and strength to it. She began to accept that her heart could hold more than one truth at a time: respect for her tribe, and affection for the man who had shown her kindness and care. One morning, Ayesha was helping Ethan tend the garden when she paused to watch him work. The sun was warm, the birds sang, and the scent of earth filled the air. She noticed the gentle way he handled the plants, the careful attention he gave to every detail, and the calm strength that guided his actions. She felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of admiration, gratitude, and something deeper she could not yet name. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where trust and affection could exist alongside duty and pride, a life where she could care for someone without losing herself. By the end of part 4, Ayesha had begun to confront feelings she had once denied. She recognized her growing affection for Ethan, struggled with the conflict between loyalty and love, and slowly began to understand that her heart was capable of more than anger or resentment. She had learned that trust could be built through patience, respect, and shared experience, and that love could grow even in unexpected places. Though the path ahead remained uncertain, Ayesha felt a quiet hope stirring within her, a hope that she could embrace her emotions, honor her values, and navigate the complexities of the heart with courage and grace. The days grew warmer as spring returned to the land, and with the changing season, Ayesha felt a shift inside herself. The anger and fear that had dominated her early days in Ethan's care had faded, replaced by something gentler yet far more powerful. She noticed it in small ways: how her chest would lift when she saw him, how she would unconsciously watch for his presence, how her thoughts often lingered on his smile or the calm steadiness in his eyes. For the first time, she admitted to herself that she no longer wished to fight the feelings that had grown quietly but steadily in her heart. Ayesha walked through the forest one morning, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the punishment from her tribe, the fear she had felt when first arriving in Ethan's cabin, and the long days of silence and stubborn pride. Every step had been a challenge, every day a test of her strength and patience. And yet, she realized that these experiences had shaped her in ways she could never have imagined. They had taught her patience, humility, and the ability to see people as more than their appearances or the labels society placed on them. Most of all, they had shown her the meaning of trust and love. Ethan joined her quietly as she walked, carrying a small basket of herbs he had gathered. "The forest is beautiful today," he said, his voice calm and gentle, matching the rhythm of her own thoughts. Ayesha smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had grown comfortable with his presence, no longer needing to keep her distance. In fact, she found comfort in it, a sense of safety she had never allowed herself to feel before. She realized that trust and love were not weaknesses, they were choices, and they required courage. Over the following days, Ayesha reflected on what she truly wanted. Returning to her tribe, while tempting in some ways, no longer seemed like the right choice. She had been punished, yes, but she had also been given a chance to see the world differently, to learn about herself, and to understand the hearts of others. She thought about her family, her people, and the lessons of her childhood, and she realized that she could honor them while also embracing her own happiness. She could be loyal without being confined by fear or anger, and she could love without losing herself. One afternoon, a minor accident occurred while they were repairing a section of the cabin roof. Ayesha slipped on a loose board and almost fell, but Ethan caught her quickly. Their eyes met, and in that moment the world seemed to pause. She felt the steady beat of his heart, the strength in his arms, and the quiet understanding in his gaze. For the first time, she allowed herself to speak freely, her voice trembling but clear. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Ethan only nodded, a gentle smile crossing his face. He did not need words to respond. His care and presence had already said more than words ever could. As the weeks passed, Ayesha and Ethan grew closer in small, meaningful ways. They shared laughter while working, exchanged quiet glances that spoke volumes, and supported each other in every task. Ayesha realized that love was not always loud or dramatic. It could be subtle, steady, and nurturing. She began to notice how much she relied on his guidance, how much she valued his opinions, and how much she enjoyed simply being near him. Her heart, once hardened by fear and resentment, had softened completely, opening to a depth of feeling she had never allowed herself to experience before. One evening, as the sun set and the forest glowed with golden light, Ayesha found herself sitting beside Ethan outside the cabin. They watched the sky together in silence, the quiet peacefulness wrapping around them like a warm blanket. Ayesha turned to him, her eyes reflecting both the setting sun and the emotions she had struggled to name. She began, hesitating, unsure of how to express the feelings that had grown so steadily in her heart. Ethan looked at her patiently, giving her the space to speak. "I never thought I could feel this way," she continued, "but I care for you more than I thought I could, and I want to be here with you." Ethan's expression softened and he reached for her hand gently, not rushing, not forcing, but simply offering comfort and connection. "I've felt the same," he said quietly. "I care for you, Ayesha, and I've waited patiently for you to understand that it's okay to feel this way." The moment was simple, yet profound. Ayesha realized that love could grow even in the most unexpected places, and that opening her heart did not make her weak. It made her stronger, more complete, and more alive. In the days that followed, their bond deepened further. They worked together, laughed together, and shared quiet moments of reflection. Ayesha began to see the world in a richer, more nuanced way. She understood that people were capable of kindness and courage, regardless of where they came from or what labels had been placed upon them. She saw that love could bridge differences, heal wounds, and create new beginnings. And most importantly, she realized that happiness was a choice, one that required courage, trust, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. Ayesha's thoughts also turned to her tribe. She knew that returning to them would not be easy, and that some might never understand her choices. But she also knew that she could honor her roots while creating a life of her own. She could carry the lessons, the values, and the love of her people in her heart, while also embracing a future shaped by her own decisions. This understanding brought her a sense of peace she had never known, a quiet certainty that she was on the right path. One morning, as the forest awoke with birdsong and sunlight filtered through the trees, Ayesha and Ethan prepared for the day's work together. She moved beside him with ease, their actions synchronized through weeks of shared tasks and understanding. She realized how much she had changed, from a proud, angry girl sent away as punishment to a woman who had learned patience, trust, and the power of love. She no longer feared the future, because she knew that whatever challenges came, they would face them together. Ayesha looked at Ethan, her eyes reflecting gratitude, affection, and a deep sense of connection. She felt the warmth of the sun, the soft rustle of leaves, and the steady presence of the man she had once been taught to hate. And she understood fully and completely that love had transformed her, not by weakening her, but by showing her the strength that came from trust, partnership, and compassion. By the end of part 5, Ayesha had made her choice. She would remain with Ethan, embracing the love and life that had grown between them. She would honor her tribe and her past, but she would also step boldly into the future, guided by her own heart. The story closed with them standing side by side, watching the sun set over the forest, hands intertwined, hearts connected, and the promise of a shared life ahead. Asha had discovered that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in defiance or pride, but in the courage to open one's heart, forgive the past, and embrace the love that has quietly waited all along.